Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Real Thread channel. Make sure to subscribe and hit that like button if you enjoy our content. Today, we are going to be discussing the film Gema kasih ibu Part 2. The narrative unfolds, picking up the threads of a familial drama centered around a woman whose life has clearly been marked by both profound love and perhaps enduring hardship. Themes that often resonate deeply within Indonesian cinema. We see the return of key figures, their faces etched with the passage of time and the weight of unspoken obligations. The central conflict, which I perceive as revolving around legacy, sacrifice, and the often conflicting desires of the younger generation versus the wisdom or perhaps rigidity of the elders, begins to sharpen. One character, perhaps a daughter who has pursued a career outside the immediate orbit of the family home, re-enters the fray, bringing with her the sharp, often abrasive pragmatism learned from navigating the competitive world of, say, modern business, or perhaps even the arts, fields where one must constantly prove their worth. This contrasts sharply with the steadfast, almost stoic devotion embodied by the mother figure, whose life seems to have been entirely dedicated to the domestic sphere, a dedication perhaps fueled by the memory of a past sacrifice that the younger members barely comprehend. It's reminiscent of the classic cinematic trope where professional ambition clashes with filial duty. The setting itself often serves as a quiet participant in the drama. Perhaps it is a sprawling, traditional house, heavy with the scent of aged wood and fading memories, or maybe a sterile, modern apartment symbolizing the emotional distance that has grown between relatives. This physical environment mirrors the internal landscape of the characters. The dialogue, I imagine, is laced with subtext, the unspoken resentments and affections boiling just beneath the surface of polite conversation. We witness moments of attempted reconciliation, tentative steps toward understanding that are often derailed by ingrained habits of communication or deeply held convictions about what constitutes right behavior. There's a palpable sense that the pursuit of individual happiness, a driving force in contemporary narratives, is viewed with suspicion by those who value collective harmony above all else. This tension is particularly powerful when dealing with matters of inheritance or the future stewardship of the family name. A significant turning point likely involves a revelation, perhaps about the father figure or a secret kept by the mother for decades, that forces everyone to re-evaluate their previous judgments. This dramatic device, frequently employed to shake the foundations of established relationships, allows the characters a moment of brutal honesty. It is in these raw, unvarnished exchanges that true empathy might finally begin to bloom, or conversely, where the chasm between them becomes insurmountable. The film seems deeply invested in exploring the enduring, often complicated nature of maternal love, suggesting that even when filtered through pain and misunderstanding, it remains the bedrock upon which these lives are built. The ending, one suspects, doesn't offer a neat Hollywood bow, but rather a nuanced acceptance of imperfection, a quiet understanding that moving forward requires acknowledging the weight of what has come before. The atmosphere thickens as the narrative delves deeper into the emotional undercurrents that have shaped these lives. We see the matriarch, whose quiet strength suggests a past where she might have been forced to forgo personal dreams, perhaps a talent for classical music or a desire to teach, ambitions sacrificed on the altar of family survival. Her hands perpetually busy, kneading dough or tending to some small symbolic chore, become a testament to a life lived in service, a stark contrast to the sleek efficiency of the returning daughter, whose business acumen likely propelled her into boardrooms or demanding creative agencies, where quick decisions and ruthless prioritization are virtues. This clash of worlds is visually represented in the cinematography, I imagine. Harsh, cool lighting illuminating the daughter's modern workspace, juxtaposed with the warm, almost sepia tones enveloping the mother in the old family home. The dialogue exchanges often revolve around practicality versus sentiment. The daughter might argue for selling an ancestral property, viewing it as a financial burden, while the mother sees it as the tangible manifestation of her husband's memory and the family's roots. It is the universal conflict between asset management and soul preservation. There is an inherent vulnerability in the younger generation as well, perhaps a sibling who feels utterly lost between these two powerful forces. This individual might be seeking direction, perhaps pursuing a less conventional path, like independent filmmaking or social activism, career choices that offer passion but little financial security, thereby intensifying the worries of the traditionalist parent. Their struggle becomes the emotional fulcrum, trying to bridge the gap using creativity where logic and duty have failed. The memories teased throughout the second part of the film are potent. We are shown fleeting glimpses, a sun-drenched afternoon, a sharp word exchanged decades ago, suggesting that the current emotional architecture is built on foundations laid during moments of intense vulnerability. The mother's unwavering belief in duty might stem from a specific moment of abandonment or profound need in her youth, a time when external support vanished, forcing her to become her own anchor. When the core conflict finally erupts, it is less a shouting match and more a devastating dismantling of facades. The pragmatist daughter might reveal that her outward success is a shield against deep-seated insecurity, a need to prove her worth because she felt undervalued growing up. The mother, in turn, might confess that her rigidity wasn't born of malice, but of terror. The fear that if she lets go of control, everything they have built, brick by emotional brick, will collapse. This shared realization of fear, though expressed through different life choices, is the closest they come to true connection. The film suggests that the deepest love often manifests as the most intense and sometimes most misguided attempts at protection. The resolution, if it can be called that, resides not in agreement, but in a shared exhaustion that allows for a cautious, silent truce under the heavy canopy of the family's shared history. The emotional intensity ratchets up as the narrative focuses on a crucial period of shared vulnerability, often triggered by a health crisis or perhaps an unexpected financial blow that forces the estranged parties back into absolute reliance on one another. Imagine the mother, whose resilience has always been her defining characteristic, now showing the fragility of advanced age, her usual authoritative posture slightly diminished. This shift in physical presence forces the successful daughter to temporarily shelve her quarterly reports and step into the role of primary caretaker, a role she clearly lacks the emotional toolkit for, despite her executive experience managing teams. This juxtaposition is poignant. She can command a room of investors, but falters when administering medication or navigating the simple, quiet anxieties of a sick parent. We might see flashbacks detailing the mother's early life, perhaps hinting at a fierce ambition she possessed before marriage. Maybe she aspired to be a teacher in a remote village, driven by a deeply held belief in education as the ultimate liberator. This suppressed dream informs her often draconian approach to her children's future paths. In securing stability for them, She inadvertently suffocated the very exploratory spirit she once cherished in herself. This revelation is often delivered indirectly, perhaps through finding an old, yellowed textbook or a forgotten letter tucked away in a dusty chest, a silent accusation against the life she chose. The dynamic with the third sibling, the sensitive artist, becomes increasingly significant here. This character, often dismissed by the others as impractical, becomes the unexpected emotional mediator. Having spent years existing on the periphery, observing the family structure from a distance, they possess the necessary objectivity. Their art, be it evocative paintings or deeply personal poetry, becomes the language the others cannot speak. When the daughter accuses the mother of stifling her, the artist might present a canvas that perfectly captures the mother's isolation, forcing the daughter to see the sacrifice not as a cage, but as a painful act of self-erasure performed out of love. The climax often hinges on a scene set during a significant Indonesian holiday or family ritual, where the formality of tradition crashes headlong into personal grievance. During a solemn gathering, perhaps a reading of prayers or a shared meal, a long-held secret spills out. Not about the parents, but perhaps about one of the children having secretly supported the other financially years ago, or a miscommunication that led to a perceived betrayal between the siblings that was never truly addressed. This shared act of facing a buried truth dissolves the carefully constructed walls. The successful daughter, whose career demands constant forward momentum, must learn the difficult art of stillness, of simply being present without trying to fix or optimize the situation. The film subtly suggests that true legacy isn't financial security or public acclaim, but the cultivation of the capacity for forgiveness within the immediate family circle. The closing moments likely feature a small, almost imperceptible gesture. The daughter patiently teaching her mother how to use a simple tablet for video calls, or the mother finally accepting one of the artist's abstract pieces onto the wall of the formal living room, signaling not complete resolution, but a hard-won truce founded on mutual recognition of shared human failing. The subsequent phase of the narrative shifts its focus outward, examining how these recalibrated familial relationships begin to influence the wider community and the professional spheres the characters inhabit. The daughter, having experienced the visceral reality of familial fragility, finds her ruthless efficiency in the corporate world subtly tempered. Her decisions are no longer purely driven by the bottom line. There is a newfound, albeit grudging, appreciation for human cost and long-term relational sustainability, themes she previously dismissed as sentimental weaknesses. Perhaps her career trajectory, which was once steeply angled toward aggressive expansion, now incorporates elements of social responsibility, inspired by the artist sibling's unwavering idealism. She starts championing initiatives that prioritize employee well-being, a direct echo of the care she was forced to provide her mother. Conversely, the artist sibling, often content to remain an observer, is nudged by the renewed family energy into a more public role. The raw emotional material unearthed during the family crisis proves too potent to keep confined to private canvases. They might secure a significant exhibition or a grant based on the thematic depth of their recent work that is explicitly rooted in the complexities of maternal sacrifice and filial conflict. This public validation, however, brings its own strain, forcing the artist to confront the boundary between authentic expression and the commodification of personal pain, a conflict mirroring the daughter's own struggles with ethical business practices. The mother, recovering and perhaps realizing the scope of her own long-held assumptions, begins to exert a quiet, almost subversive influence. No longer needing to be the center of control, she finds space to mentor younger women in the neighborhood, sharing practical wisdom distilled from her decades of silent resilience. This is her belated opportunity to utilize her innate teaching ability, not in a formal classroom, but in the organic setting of community building. She becomes a quiet anchor, her presence lending weight and authenticity to the aspirations of the younger generation, validating the very paths, artistic and professional, that she once subtly discouraged in her own children. The enduring commentary of this cinematic chapter seems to lie in the idea that true maturity is not about achieving external success or maintaining perfect order, but about the ongoing, messy work of integrating one's past self with one's present reality. The characters are learning, through painful trial and error, that the definitions of duty and success are fluid. The film suggests that the bonds of kinship, though often forged in the heat of misunderstanding, possess an incredible tensile strength, capable of adapting to new pressures without completely breaking. The final scenes might show them collaboratively planning a future event, perhaps a community project or a small, intimate family gathering, where each person contributes their distinct skill set, not out of obligation, but out of an earned, deeply felt respect for the other's individual journey. It is a quiet acknowledgement that love, like a complex piece of Indonesian heritage, must be constantly maintained, adapted, and fiercely protected. The narrative then flows into the delicate aftermath, where the echo of shared vulnerability transforms into the foundation for future, albeit tentative, collaboration. The daughter, whose career trajectory once seemed unalterably vertical, begins to integrate a philosophy of patient endurance into her high-stakes decision-making. One can visualize her in a tense virtual meeting instead of immediately bulldozing a dissenting opinion, pausing, remembering the agonizingly slow process of her mother's recovery, and opting instead for strategic patience, a move that surprisingly yields a better long-term outcome. This shift is not a complete abandonment of her hard-won professional identity. She remains sharp, incisive, but her edges are softened by a newly recognized emotional literacy. Her inspiration now seems drawn not just from business titans, but from the quiet fortitude she witnessed in her mother during moments of profound physical weakness. Meanwhile, the artist sibling capitalizes on the newfound public attention, not by chasing fame, but by weaving the familial tapestry directly into their artistic statement. Their new exhibition might feature multimedia installations where fragments of the mother's handwritten recipes are overlaid with recordings of the daughter's tense, late-night conference calls. It is a bold, almost confrontational act of synthesizing their disparate worlds, forcing viewers to acknowledge that the grand narratives of success and duty are often built from the same intimate, flawed components. The artist finds their inspiration blooming in the intersection of these realities, finally feeling validated not just for their talent, but for their unique positioning as the family's emotional translator. The mother's transformation is perhaps the most resonant. Relieved of the burden of absolute control, she channels her formidable organizational skills into nurturing the local neighborhood's collective spirit. She organizes a system for sharing resources among elderly residents. Her meticulous planning skills, once used to manage household expectations, now applied altruistically. This external validation of her innate capacity to structure and sustain gives her a sense of purpose beyond the confines of her own home, a realization that her life was not merely a series of sacrifices, but a protracted apprenticeship in community building. Her subtle encouragement of the artist, perhaps by framing one of their more challenging pieces and displaying it prominently, signals a final, profound acceptance of paths she once feared. The overarching emotional tone settles into a mature acceptance that life is a series of necessary compromises, none of which ever feel entirely perfect. There are no grand pronouncements of eternal harmony, but rather the establishment of new, respectful boundaries. The film culminates not in a celebration, but in a shared moment of quiet labor. Perhaps all three are tending to the neglected garden behind the ancestral home. The daughter, surprisingly adept with the physical work, digs the soil with methodical precision. The artist frames the light hitting the leaves in their mind's eye. And the mother offers quiet, specific instructions on soil aeration. Her voice soft, but carrying the undeniable authority of lived experience. This shared, tangible effort becomes the ultimate symbol of their ongoing reconciliation, illustrating that the deepest forms of love are demonstrated not through words, but through the willingness to work side by side on something real, something that will continue to grow long after the drama has subsided. The final movements of the narrative underscore this hard-won equilibrium, focusing on the integration of past sacrifices into a sustainable future, suggesting that true familial peace is an active rather than passive achievement. The daughter, the embodiment of modern ambition, who once viewed time purely as a quantifiable resource, begins to actively incorporate unstructured, reflective moments into her highly managed schedule. This is visualized through small acts, perhaps dedicating the first hour of her day not to emails, but to silently reading a book her mother once cherished, a tacit acknowledgement that the wisdom of the past holds strategic value. Her career success is now subtly reframed. Rather than being solely a measure of personal triumph over perceived childhood neglect, it becomes a platform from which to enact structural kindness, benefiting those around her, including her own team, mirroring the protective instincts she finally honed watching over her ailing mother. The artist siblings' public success continues to evolve beyond mere exhibition. Inspired by the mother's newfound community involvement, the artist launches a series of free workshops centered on therapeutic art expression for local youth, effectively bridging their avant-garde sensibility with tangible social utility. This demonstrates a matured understanding of their role, not merely to interpret suffering, but to offer tools for processing it. The artist draws deep inspiration from the sheer durability of the mother figure, translating that stoic endurance into potent, accessible visual metaphors that resonate deeply with a generation facing different, but equally pressing, forms of uncertainty. The mother, now the unofficial sage of her immediate circle, finds her greatest fulfillment in bridging the generational gap between her children. She doesn't dictate. Instead, she frames the historical context for their present actions. When the daughter faces a particularly brutal ethical choice in business, the mother might recount a seemingly insignificant anecdote from her youth, a moment where integrity was tested with very little apparent reward, thereby providing the daughter with a moral compass calibrated outside the parameters of financial gain. She effectively validates the daughter's hard exterior while gently encouraging the blossoming empathy she sees emerging. The conclusion of the film leans heavily into the quiet dignity of continuity. We see the family engaging in an annual tradition, perhaps a pilgrimage to a place significant to the deceased father, but the atmosphere is markedly different. Where before there was strained obligation, there is now genuine, if understated, companionship. The daughter drives, meticulously planning the route for efficiency, but taking deliberate detours to visit places her mother mentions in passing. The artist documents the journey with a sense of affectionate reverence, capturing fleeting moments of unguarded joy on their faces. The mother, seated comfortably between them, is no longer directing the journey, but enjoying the ride, secure in the knowledge that the legacy she preserved was not just the family name or property, but the capacity for the three of them to navigate life's complexities together, informed by the very sacrifices that once threatened to tear them apart. The film ultimately leaves the audience with the feeling that the most profound acts of love are often the mundane, continuous efforts required to keep a complex system like a family functioning, not flawlessly, but faithfully. The final sequence lingers on the concept of enduring legacy, shifting the focus from internal healing to the external imprint these individuals choose to leave on the world, a testament to the evolution spurred by their reconciliation. The daughter, having successfully navigated a difficult corporate merger following the family crisis, institutes a formal mentorship program within her firm specifically designed to elevate women re-entering the workforce after extended family caregiving, a direct, practical homage to the role her mother was forced into. Her success is no longer purely self-referential. It becomes institutionalized empathy. Her professional confidence is now underpinned by a deeper, more humanistic understanding, a trait cultivated not in business school, but in the sterile quiet of a sick room. She carries herself with a grounded authority, one that respects the complexity of human timelines beyond the demands of the quarterly report. The artist, having found a unique voice through their raw depiction of familial struggle, takes their talent a step further into the realm of public memory. They are commissioned to create a large-scale public artwork for the city center, a piece that subtly weaves together motifs from their mother's suppressed dreams, perhaps stylized imagery of an open book or a blossoming tree, rendered in a style that acknowledges the harsh lines of modern urban existence. Their inspiration is now fully integrated. The discipline learned from the daughter's precision and the resilience gleaned from the mother's stoicism coalesce into art that is both critically acclaimed and deeply resonant with the everyday populace, struggling with similar pressures of obligation versus aspiration. The mother, finding a quiet joy in her semi-retirement from absolute control, dedicates herself to curating the family's history, not as a rigid set of rules, but as a source of adaptable wisdom. She begins meticulously archiving old photographs and correspondence, not to enforce nostalgia, but to create a visual narrative of resilience for her grandchildren, should she ever have them. She recognizes that her greatest achievement was not in the sacrifices made, but in the survival of the core bonds through those sacrifices. Her inspiration becomes one of preservation, ensuring that the painful lessons are understood, not repeated blindly. She achieves a final form of agency by choosing how her own story will be told. The film closes not with a dramatic gathering, but with asynchronous moments of quiet productivity, suggesting that life continues, enriched by past struggles. We see the daughter taking a rare afternoon off, not for leisure, but to physically help the artist move equipment for their new workshop space. We see the mother sitting quietly in the corner of the workshop, offering small, precise corrections on the seating arrangement for the children attending the art class, her advice invaluable and unobtrusive. There is an unspoken language of interdependence now, where each character supports the others from the position of their evolved strengths. The final shot might focus on a hand, perhaps the mother's, perhaps the daughter's, gently adjusting a piece of art in the community center, the gesture unifying themes of care, creation, and continuation. The enduring message is that love, particularly maternal love, is not static possession, but the continuous, difficult process of letting go while remaining steadfastly present. The conclusion of the film lingers in a space of contemplative serenity, suggesting that the true resolution lies not in perfect harmony, but in the sustained effort to appreciate divergent paths. The lingering emotional residue centers on gratitude, a quiet acknowledgement of the painful alchemy that forged their current, albeit imperfect, understanding. The daughter, now a leader in her field, consciously institutes quarterly legacy reviews within her company structure, not as mandatory HR exercises, but as genuine opportunities for senior staff to reflect on their personal commitments versus professional demands, a direct, institutionalized response to the internal crisis she faced. Her former reputation for demanding immediate results softens into one renowned for fostering sustainable excellence. Her inspiration, drawn from the slow, deliberate pacing required for true healing. She understands now that the most valuable assets are not always quantifiable on a balance sheet. The artist, having successfully navigated the commercial demands of their public art, begins a collaborative project with the mother. This venture involves documenting the oral histories of elder women in their community, transcribing and illustrating their narratives of sacrifice and adaptation. This project serves as the ultimate synthesis. The artist finds profound, meaningful subject matter that is validated by the mother's lived experience, while the mother finally sees her own submerged history given voice and permanence through creative representation. The artist's early struggle to find a marketable voice is overcome by anchoring their expression in the undeniable truth of their matriarch's experience. The mother, observing her children carving out lives built upon the foundations she laid, even if those foundations were initially laid with unintentional rigidity, experiences a deep, final release from the anxiety of control. Her inspiration is now drawn from witnessing their autonomy. In a particularly poignant scene, she receives an invitation to one of her daughter's major corporate functions. Instead of meticulously scrutinizing the itinerary or attempting to manage the seating arrangements, she attends simply as herself, dressed in a vibrant outfit chosen by the artist. And she spends the evening not offering advice, but listening intently to the struggles of junior executives, sharing wisdom only when directly asked. She has moved from being the subject of duty to being a source of earned counsel. The film avoids any sweeping, dramatic finale. Instead, the final montage is a series of vignettes showing the three characters inhabiting their separate yet connected lives. We see the daughter mentoring a young female entrepreneur, the artist guiding a child through a complex painting technique, and the mother tending to a small herb garden, a quiet, controlled piece of nature she cultivates for herself. The common thread weaving through these images is a profound, unspoken respect. The tension of expectation has been replaced by the comfort of acceptance. The narrative concludes with the suggestion that the relentless, often agonizing love between a mother and her children does not fade, but rather matures into a complex, enduring interdependence, a continuous conversation carried forward not through shared opinion, but through the mutual respect for the different truths each one fought to secure. The concluding imagery solidifies the film's philosophical stance that true familial legacy resides in the ongoing dynamic negotiation between past obligations and future self-determination. The daughter, whose career was initially defined by sharp demarcation and immediate returns, begins to champion internal change within her organization, not through fiery mandates, but through quiet, persistent modeling of work-life integration, subtly influencing corporate culture by demonstrating that strength can coexist with vulnerability. Her inspiration now flows from a deeper well. The ruthless pursuit of success has mellowed into a commitment to legacy building that supports others, a direct reflection of the sacrifices she once resented, now understood as necessary groundwork. The artist, having found their voice by illuminating the domestic battles, pivots their focus toward mentorship rooted in emotional honesty. They organize outreach programs in underserved areas, bringing art supplies and open dialogue to young people grappling with similar pressures of parental expectation versus personal calling. This public-facing role allows them to process their own history through teaching, using their refined aesthetic sensibilities to help others articulate feelings that words often fail to capture. Their work becomes a bridge, transforming inherited pain into shared creative expression, finally fulfilling the promise of art as a transformative social force rather than just a personal outlet. The mother's final act of grace is perhaps the most moving. She intentionally steps back from any semblance of management, entrusting the maintenance of the ancestral home, that symbol of long-held burdens, to her children jointly. She offers no oversight, only the occasional, carefully chosen observation about the best way to care for the old teak wood or the specific needs of the garden soil. This deliberate relinquishing of control is her ultimate gift to them, demonstrating that true love requires faith in the capability of the loved ones to carry the torch independently. She finds contentment in witnessing their interdependence, a bond forged not by shared ideology, but by shared history and hard-won forgiveness. The film fades out not on a scene of grand reconciliation, but on a quiet tableau suggesting habitual connection. Perhaps the three are gathered in the living room, the space now decorated with a blend of the daughter's minimalist art acquisitions, the artist's evocative pieces, and the mother's carefully preserved antique textiles. They are not speaking. They are simply existing in comfortable proximity. The final voiceover, perhaps supplied by the mother in a tone devoid of judgment or regret, speaks to the enduring nature of familial ties, that they are not bonds to be broken or perfected, but ecosystems to be tended. The story ends suggesting that life's great challenge is not overcoming conflict, but learning to inhabit the peace that follows, a peace earned through the difficult, continuous labor of seeing one another clearly, faults and all. The concluding sentiment of the film centers on the quiet daily affirmations that cement the hard-won peace. The narrative subtly moves away from high-stakes drama towards the texture of everyday existence, where the integration of past selves and present roles becomes normalized. The daughter, whose professional life was once a relentless marathon, now intentionally carves out blocks of time dedicated solely to presence, often joining her mother for slow, reflective afternoons. These moments are not structured around solving old problems. Rather, they are built around shared, simple pleasures, like preparing traditional foods together, where the daughter finally learns the nuanced patience required for perfect dough consistency. A physical manifestation of accepting that some things cannot be rushed or optimized by technology. Her inspiration now clearly stems from a balanced view, valuing relational capital as highly as financial capital. The artist's influence deepens as their public work transitions into an intergenerational dialogue. They organize a traveling exhibition showcasing the oral histories collected alongside visual interpretations, using the mother's quiet wisdom as the central narrative spine. This collaboration allows the artists to finally reconcile their ambitious creative drive with a deep sense of duty, realizing that true artistic contribution can be found in honoring the unseen labor of others. The public response validates not just their artistry, but the authenticity of their emotional source material, proving that deeply personal narratives possess universal resonance. The mother, fully embracing her role as the family's wise elder, employs her organizational skills not to manage her children, but to foster connection between them on her terms rooted in shared history. She initiates family research projects, tasking the daughter with the logical organization of historical documents and the artist with the creative narrative construction, ensuring that their unique skills are utilized in concert rather than conflict. This collaborative effort forces a mutual reliance that transcends mere obligation. It becomes a shared act of building a cohesive memory, free from the burden of the past's emotional weight. The final scenes emphasize continuity through small traditions. There is an implied sense of the future, perhaps glimpsed through the mother speaking fondly, but without pressure, about the potential for grandchildren, a future she once desperately tried to engineer, but now views with hopeful detachment. The emotional arc concludes with a pervasive feeling of warmth and earned stillness. The film suggests that the deepest expression of love, particularly the enduring love between a mother and her children, is the capacity to allow the other to finally stand fully on their own ground, acknowledging that the sacrifices made were not chains, but the launchpad for independent flourishing. The narrative dissolves not in tears or dramatic pronouncements, but in the soft, enduring light of mutual respect settled into the fabric of daily life. The narrative settles into a sustained exploration of how these refined interpersonal dynamics manifest in their respective crafts, demonstrating that profound personal change invariably reshapes professional output. The daughter, whose earlier career was driven by an almost visceral need to prove her competence, a reaction to feeling overlooked in her youth, now channels her formidable strategic mind toward philanthropic endeavors that utilize her business acumen for social good, often consulting pro bono for organizations championed by the artist. Her inspiration is no longer rooted in conquest, but in cultivation. She finds a new kind of professional satisfaction in nurturing nascent projects, a mirroring of the nurturing role she reluctantly assumed for her mother. She carries herself with an assurance that is less brittle and more genuinely authoritative, having learned that true strength lies in the ability to pivot and support rather than rigidly command. The artist, now benefiting from both public recognition and a stable, empathetic feedback loop with their family, deepens their exploration of memory and materiality. Their next significant work involves a series of textile art pieces, incorporating threads and fabrics saved by the mother over decades, scraps that once held no monetary value, but now become artifacts imbued with profound personal history. This artistic choice is a direct homage to the mother's lifelong practice of saving, repurposing, and sustaining, turning perceived thrift into a potent aesthetic statement about enduring value. The artist finds genuine fulfillment in making the invisible labor of their mother visible and celebrated within a contemporary artistic context. The mother, in her role as the quiet curator of family wisdom, begins to express her history, not through recounting grievances, but through storytelling, centered on resilience. She focuses particularly on the memory of her husband, but now framed through the lens of partnership rather than pure loss. She emphasizes the small, shared triumphs, the securing of their first modest home, the careful budgeting through lean years, thus providing her children with a grounded understanding of perseverance that supersedes the romanticized notion of sacrifice. This retrospective storytelling becomes a healing act for her, allowing her to reclaim agency over her narrative, presenting her past not as a list of things she gave up, but as a series of deliberate, loving choices. The final unifying element is an acknowledgement of the cultural heritage that binds them, perhaps manifested through their joint support of a local cultural preservation society. They work side by side, the daughter managing the logistics and fundraising, the artist designing the promotional materials, and the mother providing the historical context and authenticity. This collective endeavor illustrates that their differences, once sources of friction, are now complementary strengths. The film suggests that the long, arduous journey through misunderstanding has culminated not in erasure of conflict, but in a mature, functional symbiosis, where each member recognizes the immense, often unseen, effort required for the others to thrive. The unspoken conclusion is that a family, much like a resilient Indonesian ecosystem, thrives when its diverse elements are allowed to operate in complementary interdependence, sustained by the deep, complicated root system of shared experience. The final, lingering impression of the film is one of quiet synthesis, where the hard-won lessons are absorbed into the very rhythm of their lives, becoming less about resolution and more about resilient continuity. The daughter, whose early life was characterized by a desperate need for external validation through achievement, begins to truly internalize the value of intrinsic worth. In major professional decisions, she now prioritizes ethical clarity over expedient profit, her demeanor exuding a calm confidence that stems from knowing her foundation is solid, built not just on quarterly gains, but on deeply examined familial truths. She institutes an annual reflection day at her company, a mandated pause for senior staff to assess their personal integrity against their professional output, a corporate ritual directly inspired by the agonizing self-reckoning she underwent with her mother. This shift is subtle, manifesting as longer, more thoughtful emails and a newfound patience in mentoring junior staff, recognizing that true leadership requires tending to human potential, much like her mother tended to the earth. The artist, moving beyond the catharsis of public exhibitions, finds a profound sense of purpose in making their work accessible and functional within the community they share. Their collaboration with the mother culminates in a published collection of local folklore and personal histories, beautifully illustrated and bound using sustainable local materials. The artist's signature style, once sharp and emotionally charged, now incorporates softer lines and richer textures, reflecting the mother's patient guidance and the shared appreciation for tangible, enduring craftsmanship. They no longer feel the need to shock or provoke. Their artistic maturity lies in their ability to illuminate deep, shared human experiences with grace and clarity. The mother, having shed the heavy mantle of control, embodies a beautiful paradox. She's the most stable presence precisely because she's let go of the need to direct. Her energy is now focused on fostering an environment of receptive learning. She attends the community art workshops less as a critique and more as a cherished participant, occasionally offering a perfectly timed observation about color or composition that draws from an intuitive, lifelong appreciation for beauty, a quiet vindication of those suppressed artistic longings. She finds joy in the unpredictability of her children's choices, realizing that their individual successes are a testament to their underlying strength, not despite her past rigidity, but perhaps in some convoluted way, because of the intense pressure that fostered their independence. The film's final visual sequence eschews a neat group portrait. Instead, it offers a montage of small, independent acts of care that bind them together across distance and daily pressures. We see the daughter sending a rare, handwritten note of encouragement to the artist regarding a challenging deadline. The artist pausing their work to set up a simple video call so the mother can see the garden bloom. And the mother, alone in the old house, carefully preserving a photograph that shows all three of them, decades younger, laughing without reservation. The enduring emotional resonance is the understanding that love is not about erasing the scars left by conflict, but about acknowledging the shared history that shaped the scars and then choosing every single day to build something beautiful upon that complex, imperfect ground. The silence between them is no longer fraught with unspoken accusations, but filled with the comfortable weight of mutual, hard-earned respect. The continuation of the narrative, Gema kasih ibu Part 2, delves deeper into the intricate emotional landscape established in its predecessor, focusing intensely on the sacrifices and enduring complexities of maternal love within a contemporary Indonesian setting. The film, building upon the groundwork laid by the initial installment, examines how familial duty intersects with personal ambition, a theme often explored in Southeast Asian cinema, where filial piety remains a cornerstone of cultural identity. The central performance, likely anchored by an actress known for nuanced portrayals of domestic struggle, perhaps drawing inspiration from the emotive depth seen in the works of veteran actresses like Rano Karno's contemporaries, albeit transposed to a female lead perspective, must carry the weight of the narrative's emotional arcs. The sophomore effort often struggles with pacing, needing to both satisfy expectations set by the first part while forging its own distinct path. Here, the story seems to gravitate towards escalating conflict, perhaps involving the grown children of the matriarch, whose differing life choices inevitably clash with her long-held expectations. If the original film focused on immediate, tangible hardship, the sequel appears dedicated to the subtler, pervasive kind of pain that arises from mismatched perspectives across generations. The cinematography, one hopes, reflects this shift, moving away from the intimate close-ups of domestic strife toward wider, perhaps more melancholic shots that emphasize the emotional distance now separating the characters. The directorial vision, presumably helmed by someone intimately familiar with local storytelling conventions, likely employs a pacing that allows for extended scenes of dialogue, moments where subtle facial expressions convey volumes. This stylistic choice is crucial in Indonesian drama, where unspoken understandings often hold more power than explicit declarations. We might observe an influence from established Indonesian melodrama traditions, where high stakes are often internal rather than external, focusing on the erosion of trust or the slow realization of misunderstanding. One compelling aspect of such narratives is the exploration of the protagonist's past. If the mother character's background is further detailed, perhaps hinting at unfulfilled dreams or past traumas that shape her current rigidity, it provides necessary context for the audience. Consider an actress whose career trajectory has shown a commitment to roles demanding authenticity over glamour. her portrayal would ground the film's more dramatic turns. This authenticity resonates deeply with audiences familiar with the enduring pressures placed upon women managing familial legacy. The musical score must also play a critical role. In these productions, the music often acts as a supplementary emotional voice, guiding the viewer through moments where dialogue ceases. We anticipate soaring yet tasteful use of traditional or contemporary Indonesian musical motifs to heighten moments of epiphany or profound sadness, avoiding the melodrama that often plagues less assured productions. Ultimately, Gema kasih ibu Part 2 attempts the challenging feat of evolving a deeply personal story into a broader commentary on modern familial dynamics. Its success rests not just on recreating the emotional intensity of the first part, but on demonstrating the enduring, often painful evolution of love when confronted by the inevitable drift of individual lives. The film needs to validate the mother's sacrifice without entirely condemning the children's pursuit of selfhood, achieving a balance that speaks to the ongoing negotiation of tradition and modernity within the Indonesian family structure. The narrative's pivot in the second part suggests a necessary confrontation with the inherent limitations of selfless devotion. The matriarch, now perhaps older and physically showing the toll of her past exertions, embodies the residual strength of an earlier generation whose life blueprint was strictly defined by service. Her resilience, once a source of stability, might now manifest as stubbornness, inadvertently suffocating the very independence she sought to secure for her offspring. This complexity demands an actor capable of portraying profound vulnerability beneath a veneer of stoicism, someone who can convey years of unspoken sacrifices through the slight tremor in their voice or the rigidity of their posture. The artistic lineage this performance might draw upon echoes the disciplined emotional restraint seen in classic Indonesian cinema, where true devastation is conveyed through averted gazes rather than histrionics. The children, conversely, represent the pull of the globalized world. Perhaps one pursues a lucrative but morally ambiguous career far from home, symbolizing material success decoupled from familial roots, while another might remain geographically close but emotionally distant, preoccupied with navigating contemporary social pressures or existential ennui. Their characterizations must avoid simple villainization. Their modernity is not inherently flawed, but rather a natural consequence of the very stability their mother fought to provide. This juxtaposition creates a fertile ground for tragic irony. If the first film was about survival, this sequel explores the subsequent challenge: how to live meaningfully once survival is achieved. The setting itself likely shifts subtly. While the core drama may still unfold within the confines of the family home, that enduring symbol of continuity, the visual language may introduce more exterior shots reflecting the characters' internal wanderings. Perhaps long, contemplative sequences set against the backdrop of Jakarta's burgeoning modernity, or the quieter rhythms of a suburban landscape contrast sharply with the timeless, suffocating atmosphere of the ancestral living room. This visual dichotomy mirrors the film's thematic core, the friction between established heritage and forward momentum. The film's success hinges on its ability to handle moments of catharsis without descending into facile resolution. A truly resonant ending would not necessarily feature a tearful reconciliation, but rather a quiet, painful acknowledgement between the parties. A mutual understanding that their definitions of love and duty are irreconcilable, but that the underlying bond persists, albeit altered. This maturity in storytelling suggests directorial confidence, steering clear of the neat conclusions favored by less ambitious melodramas. It honors the long shadow cast by maternal influence, acknowledging that sometimes the deepest expressions of love leave the deepest scars, wounds that do not easily fade, even in the face of renewed affection. The lingering emotional texture should be one of acceptance of imperfection, both in the parent's unwavering commitment and the children's flawed pursuit of self-actualization. The film's exploration of legacy is intrinsically tied to the materiality surrounding the characters. The family home, if depicted with meticulous detail, becomes a character in itself, a repository of memories laden with obligation. We might see specific objects, an aged piece of batik, a worn prayer rug, a collection of old photographs that the mother clings to, each item representing a moment she invested her life force into. The children's subtle disregard for these artifacts, perhaps storing them away in dusty attics or replacing them with minimalist, mass-produced furniture, functions as a visual shorthand for their perceived rejection of the past. This dynamic resonates strongly with the thematic concerns often examined by filmmakers, focusing on the Indonesian diaspora or rapid urbanization, where the tangible link to ancestral ways of life is constantly under threat. Consider the specific emotional labor exerted by the mother figure. Her performance must convey an exhaustion that transcends physical tiredness, settling into a deep-seated spiritual fatigue born from constantly anticipating needs that were never verbally expressed by those she loved. If the script allows for flashbacks, perhaps illustrating a pivotal moment early in her marriage or during a significant financial struggle, we would understand how her current rigidity was forged in the crucible of necessity. An actress channeling the gravitas of someone like Christine Hakim, known for conveying immense strength through minimal external display, would elevate this role beyond mere archetype into profound psychological portraiture. The conflict concerning the children must also be multifaceted. Let us imagine one child is driven by a desire to honor the mother through tangible success, perhaps launching a business that incorporates traditional elements but with a modern global scale. This child's struggle lies in trying to translate unconditional love into measurable achievement, constantly feeling their efforts fall short of the mother's internalized, non-quantifiable standard of devotion. The other child might be the artistic or academic rebel, viewing the mother's life as a cautionary tale, their ambition defined by the conscious necessity to reject the perceived subservience of the maternal role. Their arguments would pivot not just on money or location, but on differing philosophies of what constitutes a meaningful existence: duty versus authenticity. The emotional climax, if executed with the subtlety suggested earlier, should avoid simplistic tears. Instead, it might feature a prolonged silence following a brutal confrontation, where the characters are forced to inhabit the uncomfortable space between what has been said and what can never be unsaid. The director's influence, perhaps drawing from the quiet intensity of directors focused on social realism, would prioritize atmosphere over action. The sound design, amplifying small domestic noises, the clinking of dishes, the hum of a distant motorbike, during these high-tension moments would underscore the reality that life continues around their emotional impasse, grounding the elevated drama in recognizable domesticity. This maturity in thematic handling solidifies Gema Kasih Ibu Part 2 as more than just a sequel. It positions it as a necessary, painful examination of what happens when the echoes of sacrificial love become deafening. The film's success ultimately hinges on its willingness to explore the inherent ambiguity of forgiveness, within such tightly woven familial structures. In many narratives centering on Indonesian family dynamics, resolution is often sought through overt acts of apology or visible reconciliation, yet the sequel seems poised to challenge this expectation. True healing, the film might argue, lies not in erasing the past hurts, the slights perceived, the opportunities missed due to misplaced obligation, but in learning to coexist with the scars. The mother, having poured her essence into her children's futures, must then face the profound emptiness of a redefined role, the sudden obsolescence of her primary function as provider and protector. This transition from active caregiver to passive observer is a powerful, often unacknowledged tragedy of later life. This need for redefined purpose might manifest in a poignant subplot involving the mother seeking an identity outside the domestic sphere, perhaps rekindling a dormant skill or engaging in community work. This foray into self-discovery, however tentative, will inevitably draw skepticism or outright resistance from her children, who are conditioned to see her only in her established role of sacrifice. If the actress portraying the mother can channel the quiet dignity of someone reclaiming agency late in life, perhaps drawing inspiration from the cultural weight carried by female figures in Indonesian folklore who embody both nurturing and formidable power, this segment of the film will resonate deeply with themes of female autonomy against patriarchal or tradition-bound expectations. Furthermore, the sequel must address the cyclical nature of these sacrifices. One of the children, perhaps the one who initially seemed most detached, may begin to exhibit patterns mirroring the mother's own self-erasing devotion in their relationships or professional life, illustrating that the emotional inheritance of sacrifice is difficult to escape. This character arc mirroring the progenitor's behavior would provide the strongest evidence that the maternal echo, the Gema kasih ibu, is not just a memory, but an active, sometimes destructive, template for living. It suggests that the deepest impact of a parent's life is often unconsciously imprinted upon the next generation's behaviors, regardless of conscious rejection. The visual language accompanying these moments of self-realization or repetition should be starkly contrasting. Where moments of tension were previously marked by close, claustrophobic framing, moments of individual clarity, the mother tending a small, personal garden, or a child making a difficult, independent choice, should utilize negative space and natural light. This visual breathing room signals an internal shift, a momentary escape from the suffocating weight of expectation. The film, by dissecting these nuanced emotional geographies, transcends the typical melodrama, achieving a more truthful, complex commentary on the enduring, often contradictory, nature of deep family love in a rapidly changing society. The exploration of the mother's emergent post-sacrifice identity necessitates a meticulous examination of her relationship with the physical remnants of her past devotion. Should the film focus on her decision to finally sell or radically alter the family home, the sacred ground where decades of emotional labor were expended? This act becomes the ultimate dramatic hinge. This tangible severing of ties with the past forces the children to confront not just the mother as an independent entity, but the legacy she built through deprivation. The internal struggle of the mother during this process, balancing the relief of liberation against the profound grief of letting go of tangible proof of her commitment, requires a performance of immense emotional precision. We are looking for the quiet terror in the act of packing away the tools of one's life's work, a moment that might be captured in a long take, focusing solely on her hands, methodically wrapping porcelain or labeling boxes, mirroring the careful, almost ritualistic care she once afforded her family's welfare. Should the film incorporate the career background of the director or writer, we might anticipate a keen sensitivity to the bureaucratic or legal complexities involved in such a transition, grounding the emotional fallout in the frustrating realities of modern life. For instance, if the director has a background emphasizing social realism, the process of property transfer or navigating elder care options might become unexpectedly fraught, symbolizing how even newfound freedom is constrained by societal structures. This prevents the narrative from becoming overly sentimental, anchoring the internal drama in relatable external obstacles. The characterization of the rebellious child, the one actively rejecting the maternal template, deserves further scrutiny. Their emotional distance is likely a shield against the fear of becoming their mother. Their ambition, perhaps in high-stakes finance or digital media, is an attempt to build a life defined by complete emotional and geographic self-determination. However, the film could subtly reveal that their relentless pursuit of control in their external life is a direct overcompensation for the emotional chaos they experienced under the guise of their mother's suffocating, albeit loving, control. A crucial scene might involve this child achieving a major professional milestone, only to find the expected surge of parental pride absent, replaced instead by a quiet, knowing sadness from the mother, who recognizes the empty victory of control without connection. Finally, the film's use of dialogue, particularly in its later scenes, should reflect a newfound sparseness. After the inevitable eruption of resentments, the true maturity lies in the ability to communicate without explanation or defense. The ultimate form of respect shown might be the willingness of the children to listen without interrupting, absorbing the weight of the mother's silence. This allows the performance of the lead actress to speak volumes in moments of apparent inaction. Gema kasih ibu. Part 2 thus establishes itself not as a story about winning or losing an argument, but about the long, difficult process of redefining love after the primary structure of duty has dissolved, leaving behind a more fragile but potentially more honest connection. The soundscape accompanying these final acts of rearrangement and unspoken understanding must be keenly employed to articulate the characters' internal states. The ambient noise of the emptying house, the hollow echo in an unfurnished room, the distant sounds of the vibrant, indifferent city outside, serves as a constant reminder of the passage of time and the finality of choices made. This technique, often favored in introspective dramas where dialogue has reached its limit, places the emotional burden squarely on the visual and auditory environment, compelling the audience to project their own interpretations onto the scene's quiet drama. The music, if present at all during these pivotal sequences, should be incredibly restrained, perhaps a single, sustained string note or a simple piano motif that avoids dictating the emotion, but rather underscores the inherent gravity of the moment, a reflection of the inherent dignity the mother finds even in her perceived defeat or liberation. The audience is left contemplating whether the sacrifice was worth the resulting solitude, or if the children, in gaining their freedom, have inherited a loneliness that mirrors their mother's initial condition, albeit cloaked in modern conveniences. This unresolved tension ensures the film lingers, questioning the very definition of success within the matrix of Indonesian familial obligation. The thematic resolution, or lack thereof, will likely be mirrored in the film's visual palette as it approaches its conclusion. If the earlier parts of the film were saturated with the warm, perhaps overly sentimental tones associated with nostalgia and lived-in domesticity, the final act should transition towards cooler, more muted colors. This chromatic shift visually represents the emotional cooling between the characters, not necessarily hostility, but a new, perhaps healthier, distance built on realism rather than idealized expectation. The lighting should become sharper, less forgiving, exposing the lines of age on the mother's face and the underlying anxiety etched onto the children's features, revealing that their struggles for autonomy are just as fraught as the struggles for stability were in the previous generation. The subtle influence of Indonesian aesthetic principles on the mise-en-scène becomes crucial here. Consider how the visual framing might incorporate elements of negative space or carefully positioned barriers, a partially closed door, a window pane separating characters to articulate psychological distance, a subtle nod to traditional spatial dynamics where proximity does not always imply intimacy. This visual language, if handled with the sophistication seen in the works of contemporary Indonesian filmmakers exploring generational shifts, reinforces the idea that even with renewed communication, the fundamental differences in their life experiences create permanent, albeit navigable, partitions. The narrative must resist the temptation to offer a convenient redemption arc for the children, suggesting instead that their growth is a long-term process initiated by the mother's drastic redefining of boundaries. For the audience, the most challenging and rewarding takeaway would be the realization that the mother's true triumph is not in being understood or appreciated in her old age, but in successfully training her children to stand on their own, even if that standing means moving further away from her orbit. This is the bittersweet payoff of true parental love, the creation of self-sufficient individuals who may no longer require the foundational sacrifices that define the parent's existence. The film thus concludes not with a joyous reunion, but with a quiet, almost secular understanding of duty fulfilled, leaving the characters poised on the brink of their separate, yet irrevocably linked, futures. The lingering uncertainty surrounding the mother's ultimate emotional state after dismantling her life's structure is perhaps the most vital element the film must address, however obliquely. Having relinquished the familiar anchor of the home and the constant demands of family management, her internal narrative pivots from duty fulfilled to the apprehension of the unknown future. This is where the performance must achieve its zenith, portraying not just the exhaustion of the past, but the nascent, almost frightening, stirrings of selfhood previously suppressed. If the actress were to embody the quiet, observational strength reminiscent of legendary figures whose later careers focused on mentorship or reflection, her scenes should emphasize stillness, a deliberate unwinding of years of hypervigilance. The thematic resonance connecting to the career inspirations behind the production might suggest a directorial choice to focus on the mother's interaction with technology or the outside world, perhaps an attempt to reconnect with long-lost acquaintances through digital means, or simply learning the mechanics of modern living that her children took for granted. This confrontation with modernity, divorced from her role as family manager, could yield moments of subtle, unintentional comedy mixed with poignant isolation. It grounds her transformation in the recognizable difficulties of aging within a rapidly evolving cultural landscape, far removed from the idealized, timeless sacrifice often depicted in melodrama. Crucially, the film must avoid framing the children's newfound independence as inherently selfish. The narrative needs to affirm that their success, however distant from the mother's initial vision, is a direct, albeit painful, maturation of the security she provided. The child who embraced global commerce, for instance, might eventually channel their success back into a project that honors an aspect of their heritage, not out of obligation, but out of genuine realization of its value. A delayed recognition spurred by the distance created when the mother stepped back. This slow, nonverbal acknowledgement from the children constitutes the film's deepest form of resolution. The final shot, therefore, should ideally avoid the traditional wide family embrace. Instead, it might focus on a single figure, perhaps the mother looking out a newly installed large window onto a landscape she is only now beginning to truly see, not as a backdrop for family life, but as her own space. The emotional weight rests on the subtle shift in her gaze, no longer searching for absent family members or anticipating needs, but simply observing. This quiet affirmation of her singular existence, achieved through the hard-won liberty earned by her own decades of labor and the subsequent necessary separation from her children, provides a complex adult conclusion to the saga of sacrificial love. A love that paradoxically requires absence to become fully realized by all parties involved. The culmination of Gema kasih ibu Part 2 seems poised to hinge on a concept often reserved for more existential cinema: the acceptance of imperfect inheritance. The film has meticulously documented the slow, agonizing calibration required when unconditional maternal love collides with individual aspiration. We are looking for a final statement that eschews easy answers, instead settling into the difficult truth that profound influence is often inherited unconsciously, not through explicit instruction. The mother's legacy, the echo of her love, is not merely her good example, but the very emotional vocabulary she instilled, a vocabulary that her children are now struggling to adapt to their own realities. The child who pursued the commercially driven, perhaps ethically murky career path might serve as the film's most complex mirror. Their relentless drive, the root of their perceived distance, is likely a direct manifestation of their mother's own fierce will to survive, channeled through a modern, materialistic lens. If the film features a moment where this child faces a professional or ethical collapse, and the mother responds not with condemnation or pity, but with the quiet, unwavering support rooted in her own history of enduring hardship, this moment transcends melodrama. It signifies that the mother finally sees her spirit, rather than just her sacrifice, reflected in her child. This scene demands an actor capable of conveying immense empathy without sacrificing the hard-won dignity the mother has recently attained. Her support must be offered as an equal, not a superior. The very structure of the narrative progression implies that true reconciliation is not about undoing past pain, but about acknowledging the validity of divergent paths. The film's success in this final act will depend on whether it grants the mother agency beyond her role as sacrificial figurehead. If her final scenes involve her engaging with an interest that is purely for her own intellectual or creative satisfaction, perhaps documenting her own history or taking a class, this action becomes the ultimate declaration of self-possession. This newly discovered space for self is not a rejection of her children, but the necessary condition for a genuine adult relationship with them. Visually, the conclusion should emphasize symmetry over unity. Rather than bringing all characters back into a single, embracing frame, the final sequences might employ split screens or parallel editing, showing the mother and children engaging in fundamentally different activities, yet existing under the same vast Indonesian sky. This suggests a harmonious disconnection, a state where love persists precisely because the dependency has been dissolved. The sound design should fade to near silence, allowing the visual composition and the audience's retained emotional memory of the preceding conflicts to carry the weight of the conclusion. Gema kasih ibu Part 2 leaves the viewer not with the warmth of solved problems, but with the profound, slightly chilly understanding that familial bonds, when truly mature, are defined by the space they allow each individual to occupy. The final thematic layer to be explored lies in the film's commentary on memory and historical revision within the family unit. As the physical remnants of the mother's life, the house, the heirlooms, are dispersed or relegated, the narrative must address how memory itself becomes contested territory. The mother, acutely aware of the sacrifices she made, perceives her past through a lens of necessity and self-effacement. Conversely, the children, viewing that past from the comfort of their present achievements, risk romanticizing the struggle, or conversely, minimizing its severity to justify their own divergent choices. The film needs scenes where these conflicting historical accounts are laid bare, not as arguments about objective truth, but as explorations of subjective emotional reality. This requires a nuanced script that allows the mother to articulate, perhaps for the first time, the specific moments of personal cost, not to elicit guilt, but to ensure her life is remembered accurately within the family narrative. This articulation should be delivered with the quiet authority she has cultivated, rather than the plaintive tone of a victim. Her inspiration might draw from figures in regional history known for their unwavering, understated resilience against overwhelming odds, grounding her personal struggle within a broader cultural context of endurance. The film might utilize the device of archival footage or old letters to insert objective, external evidence of the past struggles, contrasting sharply with the children's selective memories. When the child who remained close witnesses the objective reality of a past hardship through these external means, their perception of their mother's current rigidity might soften, not into full agreement, but into a deeper, earned respect for her ingrained caution. This intellectual engagement with the past replaces the earlier, purely emotional confrontation. Ultimately, the film suggests that genuine connection in later life is built upon this foundation of acknowledged differing truths. It is a mature understanding that one cannot force another generation to inhabit the same emotional landscape, but one can ensure the memory of the foundation, the Gema kasih ibu, is understood in its full, often contradictory complexity. The final emotional resonance should stem from the quiet realization that the echo is not just heard, but actively interpreted, shaping the future paths of those who carry it forward, even as they carve out their own distinct sounds. The concept of the unspoken contract within the family dynamic, deeply ingrained in Indonesian social fabric, reaches its crucial breaking point in the film's latter half. This contract, an invisible agreement where maternal devotion is expected to yield unquestioning filial piety, is precisely what the mother must dismantle for her own and her children's genuine autonomy. The film's success pivots on demonstrating that the breaking of this contract does not equate to the severing of love, but rather its transformation into something less demanding and more reciprocal, albeit harder to sustain initially. The complexity of the mother's role in this deconstruction demands a performance that acknowledges the inherent paradox. she must actively undo the very thing that defined her existence. If the actress has a background in theater, she might bring a sense of structured, deliberate finality to these moments of boundary setting, treating the dismantling of her old life like a carefully executed final performance before retirement. Her internal conflict would be the fear that relinquishing control means disappearing entirely from her children's lives, a fear rooted in a lifetime where value was directly proportional to utility. The film's tone, perhaps influenced by directors known for their slow burn psychological portraits, would lean into the awkwardness that follows such necessary confrontations. The children, initially feeling liberated, might discover that the absence of their mother's clear demands leaves them adrift, prompting them to seek out external validation in unhealthy ways. The globally ambitious child might become trapped in a cycle of endless, unfulfilling achievements, realizing that the metric of success they adopted was inherently hollow, without the intrinsic, unconditional affirmation their mother once provided, an affirmation they perhaps only recognize the value of now that it is being deliberately withdrawn. The visual metaphor of light and shadow can be powerfully employed here. If the earlier domestic scenes were often dimly lit, suggesting secrets or the hidden nature of sacrifice, the mother's new solitary spaces should be flooded with natural, sometimes harsh, light. This light illuminates not just her surroundings, but her own unvarnished reality, revealing imperfections and vulnerabilities. This shift reflects a move towards transparency, forcing the children to see their mother not as an idealized icon, but as a complex, flawed woman finally confronting her own belated needs. The narrative thus transcends the melodrama of obligation, evolving into a profound meditation on the arduous, multi-generational work required to transform duty into authentic, mutual regard within the contemporary family setting. The film's philosophical underpinning must ultimately grapple with the concept of unintended consequences. The idea that even the purest intentions, when executed with absolute rigidity, can forge chains for the next generation. This is where the narrative must achieve its most devastating subtlety, moving beyond personal grievances to a commentary on cultural expectations. The mother's unwavering commitment to survival inadvertently programmed her children for ambition, and the clash is not between good and evil, but between two valid, yet mutually exclusive blueprints for a meaningful life. To deepen the characterization of the mother in her solitary phase, the narrative could introduce an element of unrecognized talent that she suppressed. Perhaps she was an exceptional weaver, a meticulous calligrapher, or possessed a deep knowledge of traditional herbalism, skills deemed impractical or secondary to the primary duty of homemaking and sacrifice. Her re-engagement with this dormant passion, even in small, hesitant ways, should be portrayed not as a pursuit of external validation, but as a quiet, almost defiant act of self-reclamation. This internal rebirth, perhaps signaled by the discovery of forgotten tools or materials during the emptying of the house, would underscore that her identity extends far beyond the roles assigned to her by tradition or necessity. The camera must linger on the grace of her hands as they relearn old motions, hands that once only knew the weight of domestic burden, now finding lightness in creation. The globally mobile child struggle must also be reframed from mere materialism to a search for context. Their vast material success might feel utterly weightless because it lacks the cultural moorings their mother embodied. A scene where this child, perhaps negotiating a massive international deal via video conference, suddenly finds themselves unable to articulate the why behind their ambition. The foundational drive instilled by their mother's relentless work ethic would be incredibly potent. They possess all the tools of the modern world, yet lack the internalized narrative